Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is the latest winner of the Jnanpith Award, India's highest literary award. He has an undisputed stature as the leading light of contemporary Hindi writing. He's done more than 5 huge novels and a dozen collections of short stories and essays. I'm delighted to welcome Nirmal Verma. Well, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
Were you surprised when you received the award? You know, one sort of normally associates awards with people who are reaching out and aggressive and social in their bearing and personalities. And you have been a very reclusive introvert. Did it come to you as a surprise?
I think all awards are a bit unexpected because you don't start writing for the awards, but whenever it comes, it is always a surprise, a pleasant surprise, I must say. Mm-hmm. But it's not something which one expects.
But you know, as someone who, and I use the word again because this is an enduring quality in your writing, that one is seeking solitude, cultivating aloneness and exploring the interior landscape. When confronted with something so sort of external and public, how do you respond? How do you feel?
One feels a bit nervous. I personally feel quite embarrassed by this because writing, the only blessing about writing is that unlike other arts, it leaves you alone and you can work in solitude without being disturbed or without showing yourself to the public at large. And that is, there is some intrusion into that area of solitude. That's true. But, well.
And when you mention that without showing yourself to the public, but in some ways, writing most intimately reveals your interior landscape.
It does. Actually, when you are working, when you are much depends upon the type of writing that you are doing. If I am writing essays, then it is a different type of a approach to language, to subject, and to the nature of my involvement. It is a more public sort of an involvement about issues, cultural issues, issues concerning society. But writing fiction, novels and short stories, is entirely on a very different level of experience. And I think one has to, I usually try to make a division between the two rather than impose one sphere on the other.
Of these 2 spheres, which do you think sort of defines the real you or defines Nirmal Verma, the writer?
It's very difficult for me to say that because for me, some of the public issues are as near to my soul as some of the experiences which I would like to embody in my fiction. For example, recently the exile of Dalai Lama and the Tibetans, the plight of the Tibetans, and also the type of a destruction of their culture in their country, it pains me a lot, and I feel that I can't write stories about Tibet because I have no first-hand experience. But I can at least raise this issue in my essays and in my public pronouncements. And this, I think, an Indian writer should do because he should operate on various levels of involvement.
Most recently, you have also expressed anguish about the continuing ban on Salman Rushdie's work, and called for a lifting of that. And in a sense, he has been exiled from India. And yet, you have been. At least in your fiction work and in much of your writing, you haven't felt that, or you have been accused, criticized by many of your contemporaries for not having a social conscience and being more concerned with the interior landscape. So in what ways do reconcile this? Is it just sort of a writer's experiencing the anguish of another writer? Or is there a larger issue involved here?
I think that it also violates the spirit of the Indian tradition. And you see, we have always, and I think India is one country in Asia which has had an open society, and the credit goes to, I think, the nature of democratic national movement that we had. And suppressing a book of a writer by a bureaucrat or by the government without letting the public itself enjoy or decide about its qualities seems to me something very abnormal in our civic life. And that's why I protested against it. It doesn't mean that I agree with what Rushdie writes, or I am a great admirer of his writing. But that has nothing to do with the, you see, when Naipaul wrote this Area of Darkness, there was again a hue and cry against the book because it was against Indira Gandhi. And again, I'm so happy that it was not banned. But and I'm glad that he came to India at least.
Well, what do you think? Have you read Rushdie? What do you think of Rushdie?
I think he's a very flamboyant imagination, and I did like his first one or two novels, but one always feels at the end of the book, like a rocket which bursts in the sky. There's a lot of illumination and light, and suddenly there's again darkness, and one is left high and dry. So one doesn't, one is dazzled by his prose, of course, but perhaps I'm not the person who would very much enjoy this type of a writing.
You mentioned initially about this aspect of exploring the interior landscape and being sort of self-contained as a writer. Whose admiration what gives you the greatest satisfaction when you write? Is it the process of writing, seeing it in print, seeing that your audience that you're writing for has responded to it? Do you think of the audience when you're writing? Or do you just write because you need catharsis?
No, I don't have any audience in my mind. Thank God I don't have any specific readers in my, but I do become my own. As you write and as time passes and you become more and more a professional writer, you yourself become your most judicious and I think very cruel critic of your own writing. And it is very, actually the process of writing itself is very tormenting, because you sometimes write a whole page and next day you read it and you think that it's rubbish and you scratch it off. So ultimately, it is very exciting when something comes off, but much of the time it is extremely frustrating, I must say, and very painful also.
So why do you expose yourself to this pain? Is it something that you feel is choiceless? It's a methodology to reorder. Well, I shouldn't use the word, but say the chaos in your head, or what motivates it? What prompts this?
But you see, sometimes I imagine that if I were not a writer, the chaos around me would have been even more frustrating. And at least this, when it comes off my writing, at least it gives me some meaning of my existence. And I do feel that those rare moments when I feel fulfilled, though they are very rare, but when a story is finished, a novel is finished after a long 6 or 4 or 5 years of tortuous work, then I do feel a kind of a satisfaction. And I think this satisfaction is more rewarding than living in a world with earning money and leading a humdrum life and from one day to another. So I think that though it is painful, it is tortuous, it is still, in the ultimate analysis, more rewarding than not being a writer at all.
And then do you wait for the response from your readers, from critics, from your publisher? You're today at a stage, of course, that whatever you wrote will be published because you have written it. Yes. But perhaps that was not always the case. So where is that moment of release from this torment? The completion of the book, it's done, it's ready to be handed over. Someone says I have read, and I don't mean just read, but I have read what you intend to say in this, and I get it. Does that give you satisfaction?
Well, yes, of course it does. Because after you have finished a novel, you are totally in darkness. You do not know whether you have really done something which is not purely nonsensical. Because fiction or writing poetry is so different from sociology or science or history, because there at least you can see that whatever you were trying to do some work, you have been able to write a fully analytical sort of a work which is to your satisfaction. But this is almost like, you see, you simply, even though you have been writing for years together, 20 years, 30 years, you can never be an objective judge of what you have written unless you get some sort of a response from the other people. And I think that is why a writer feels that though he writes in solitude, that is one reason why he would like to get his stories published. It would be very hypocritical on his part to say that he doesn't bother about public or readers or critics. They do matter a lot.
You have belonged to a movement of story writing that has been identified with the Nayi Kahani movement, where you don't feel the same passionate social commitment in your work. Do you feel that there is a social, a larger responsibility that a writer has because he's a writer beyond, beyond what is intrinsic to being a citizen of the world, as it were, or society and community? Do you have a special responsibility in some ways?
Well, I do not have this sort of a burden on my conscience that I have to fulfill a kind of a responsibility. That is true. On the other hand, I feel that in a country where I live, I work, the type of things which I write in my language, it will of course evoke a kind of a response from readers. And since I write in Hindi, which is read by people by larger segment of people in Bihar, in Madhya Pradesh, in Rajasthan, it becomes important for me to see whether my book creates some sort of an intervention, some sort of a disturbance in the type of lives which they lead. And I think I can say very humbly that that is what a writer can expect, that if he can see that there are certain alternative ways of seeing things, of interpreting reality, he feels that he has been able to fulfill his job. More than that, if you feel that you have to really actively participate in the social changes which are taking place, I think it is better that either he should become a political activist, or short of that, he can choose writing for journalists, for newspapers, or essays, as I sometimes do.
Right. This interpretation of reality, and let's shall we say the alternate reality that you create in your work, drawing upon the external reality, it seems to have a mood of pessimism to it. In one of your recent novels, an author says that, well, the protagonist says, well, if there is happiness, I haven't, I haven't seen it. I don't know where it is. Do you feel unhappy?
No, I don't feel unhappy, but I also feel that one should not be trapped by the illusions of happiness which we create around ourselves, these substitute comforts to lull our conscience. And I think a great writer is one like Tolstoy or like Dostoevsky, who try to awake you, to make you awake to the nature of reality around you, which sometimes you try to avoid. You want to shut your eyes to some of the ugly aspects of life. And there is no such thing as untouchability in literature. That's what I feel, that everything which happens in our lives gets a kind of a very important place in literature, which enables a reader to feel that there is something much more than the life he is able to lead. I mean, after all, literature is an enhanced version of existence, and that perhaps this feeling that there is something much more, that there are some truths which we forget or ignore in our humdrum existence of every day, which literature brings into focus. And that, I think, is very important.
As a writer, do you sometimes regret the fact that the very tools of your expression, writing, words, the ability for what you write to be read, is something that vast numbers of our fellow countrymen, women and children are deprived of? So in some senses that frustrates the intent of literature, that frustrates the intent of writing. You want to reach out to people, and there are people who simply do not have the training, the skills, the ability to even read, forget interpret, and receive the underlying message. So in that kind of social environment, what becomes sort of the role of the writer, the role of literature, beyond being sort of, well, I subscribe to what you practice and follow and believe in that, so I don't say it with any disrespect, but just sort of an indulgence of the elite. Would you ever feel frustration of that kind?
Not really that, but I totally agree with you that there is a kind of a frustration inside that you would like to have a larger number of readers, and that is not possible unless there is a larger degree of literacy in our country. Actually, it is surprising that Hindi area is so vast, millions of people live here, and a writer is able to sell only 1,000 or 2,000 copies of his book, which is absolutely pitiable. And though it is also true that when the literate readership, when it reads some important book, the sensibility is filtered through that literate minority to a larger segment of society at large, because it is something not in isolation, but still an active dialogue between the readers and the writer is always more healthy for the growth of literature than merely a passive recipient of books which are being published and then being sold by.
If the impulse is communication, if the impulse is giving form, order and structure to your internal universe and how it responds to the external one, have you thought of looking at other art forms that may have a larger reach?
Of course, yes. I've always loved theatre. And 3 of my stories years ago were staged by National School of Drama, and I felt a thrill that the words which I had written in my solitude are being spoken by the actors on the stage, and people are listening to them, responding to them. And this gave me a certain sensation which I never felt as a writer, writing in seclusion. And I feel that at least theatre is closest to what I would call a rapport between a writer and the audience.
You know, the word seclusion comes up very often when reading your work, or talking about your work, or talking about you in some ways. How important is seclusion for a writer?
In my case, I think it is important. Maybe it is temperamental, and other writers are not, are more publicly attuned, as I am not. Partly it is perhaps because of my childhood, which I spent in the mountains, on the hill stations, and there was always a kind of a seclusion of that, geographical seclusion of that sort, which seeped into my bones and flesh. And also because I feel that writing books was a kind of an escape from the public life, if I think over it now, that one can work without, after when you are making a film, you come into contact with the actors and director and everyone, and it's almost a very teamwork. But there is one solace about writing, is that you don't have to meet anybody. You only have to have a pencil and a paper, and you can do your work in your room without being bothered about it.
Well, a little bit about your life. You did a master's degree in history from St. Stephen's College, traditionally seen as the citadel of sort of the more westernized Indian, and certainly in your generation, feeding the civil services in India, and a very Western kind of orientation. When did this sort of sensibility, a very Indian, local sensibility come up for you, or dawn on you, despite 5 years in a very sort of Western environment?
Yeah, you see, I would say that we people live a sort of a double life, because in college and in universities we have a certain type of a ambience. We study in English, we study subjects which, but at home the sources of nourishment are very different. I mean, we used to get magazines in Hindi, which my sister and my mother would read, and I would very avidly read them. And also my grandfather would be very keen to make me read, because his eyesight was weak, and he would say that I will give you one anna. He used to read one page of Kalyan, which used to come in a religious magazine. So see, the entire domestic atmosphere was of such that I found that my entire inner being is attuned to my language, which is Hindi, to my sanskaras, to my sort of a religious background in which I was reared up. So all these things constitute a very important part of my personality. And when I went to St. Stephen's College, I saw another part of life which was as important to me and close to me. I wouldn't say that it was something artificial or it was something elitistic. And I think it is this complex combination of influences of home, outside, which go to make a complete person as such. At least the attempt is to try to find a sort of coherence in these diverse aspects of one's experiences.
And sort of like most young people at university, and certainly in the 50s, 60s, and even in the parts of the 70s, you were enamored of Marxism and the socialist doctrine. You went to Czechoslovakia and spent time there. It's sort of now a fairly conventional, shall I say, wisdom or insight that the structures of the communist state and Marxist states failed to deliver the ideals that they had promised. But do you still, are there remnants of that ideal, those sort of philosophical yearnings that you still subscribe to and hold on to?
Yes and no. Yes, in this sense that I do feel that inequities and injustice in our society sometimes are abominable, and one should do something about it. I joined the Communist Party because I felt that that is the way, that it is a more radical way than any other party is doing it. But later I realized that this sort of a one-dimensional approach to human existence is absolutely limited and circumscribing. So I thought, when I came back from Czechoslovakia, that some other alternative should be explored, and I found that the Indian forms of resistance which Gandhi evolved against the Britishers had a greater degree of affinity with our temperament and our tradition than the types of ideologies that we imported from the West. But the one thing which remained continuously in my life and which sustained me is that one should never remain indifferent, that a kind of a involvement, whether in your seclusion through your writing or in commitments to the society in which you are living, is something which you owe, because you are a privileged person living in India who has got education, who has got something which other people are deprived of, and this you should return in some form or the other.
You know, you're sort of into your 70s with plenty of writing years ahead of you. What sort of aspirations do you have for yourself, both in terms of this engaging externally in the social environment and in society, and the inequity and the pain and the suffering that you see around you? What is it that sort of moves you, touches you, and pushes the hardest buttons of despair?
Well, I think my aspiration is that I should make writing as the only vocation through which all these concerns which I consider to be important could be meaningfully and effectively articulated. Up till now, sometimes I have made escape routes. I thought that not merely as a writer, but I should also become a part of an activist. Sometimes I do. But now I think that as I grow older, I feel that I should try to draw the maximum juice from my writing, from my language, in order to represent something which is my writer's vocation. And that I would not like to ignore. I cannot imagine a future in my life when I would not be able to write, for example. That makes the whole thing so bleak and empty for me.
There are frequently and eternally in some ways newer issues and concerns that come up simultaneous to the eternal ones of exploitation, inequity, sort of a declining sense of interconnectedness, which is something that you very passionately feel and write about. What is the one concern, if you had to put a finger on, that you feel most passionately and strongly about?
To seek one's meaning of existence on this earth, why I am here, and who actually am I? I think these are spiritual questions, these are metaphysical questions, but these are also very existential questions. I think all my books in some ways would like to explore these questions devoid of religious phraseology, but on the bare bones of existence, how to explore this meaning of one's life. And this, I think, is the most important question so far as I am concerned.
Who am I? If at the rare social context that one might be able to meet you, and assuming I didn't know who you were, and I didn't know of your antecedents as a writer, and the award that you have gotten, I would say, well, I'm so-and-so, who are you? What would you say?
I'm nothing.
Thank you very much. This has been a great privilege.